The lives of millions of people changed forever. The streets of the city were flooded with terrifying mutants. The zombies were hungry and searching for survivors. Anyone could be infected, even pregnant women who lost their babies. Those who managed to survive tried to fight for survival, so explosions and gunshots were constantly heard in the city. There was a real army of the dead on the streets looking for their victims. The main character was hiding in his house. Finally, the explosions stopped, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Now he needed to get to the shelter as quickly as possible, because another series of explosions could start at any moment. He was in such a hurry that he fell and almost broke his leg. The boy tried to gather the most necessary things he could take with him. First of all, these were maps and addresses of the city. When he had packed his briefcase, he began to prepare to leave his home. He had to create improvised armor for himself out of books to protect the vulnerable parts of his body. In addition, he armed himself with weapons he made himself from what he had. Now that he was ready, his great journey was about to begin. He felt that the smell of gas was getting stronger, so he needed to escape from the house as quickly as possible. He knew that there weren't many zombies behind the house, so he chose this route for his escape. It was very scary, but he had no other choice. Besides, his mother was waiting for him, so he gathered his strength and began to climb down. The boy began to sway from side to side, and it seemed that his rope was not very reliable. But he had been preparing for this day for a very long time. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion in his house. Now his rope broke and the boy began to fall to the ground. A few days ago, no one could have imagined that humanity was on the verge of a huge catastrophe. Strange flashes were observed in the sun, which could lead to power outages and unstable internet service. Many doctors and professors were convinced that humanity would face mass extinction. The first and most famous case was the extinction of the dinosaurs. Meanwhile, at an elite club, security guards observed a man who was behaving very strangely. First, the unknown man changed his clothes on the street, then left his belongings in a trash can. After that, he simply went into the club and carried a strange bag with him the whole time. They watched him closely the whole time, trying to see his face. In fact, he had an important meeting. He had to present a plan for developing a new game. For this, he wanted to receive a generous reward. But his client looked at him in surprise after he named the price of his product. The man agreed to pay $500,000 for the perfect plan. And this amount was almost twice as much as the main character wanted from the very beginning. Director Cao was very thoughtful and cautious, so he prepared a special flash drive that could not be tracked. Now Cao asked for the bill for lunch, but the main character wanted to pay himself because he had invited him. The amount was so large that he simply did not have the money to pay. The restaurant only accepted cash, and the hero wanted to try to pay by card. Director Cao had a VIP card, so he decided to pay for him. They agreed on this, and now Cao will wait for good news and a good job. As they left the restaurant, an expensive car similar to a Mercedes arrived for the director. He offered to give the main character a ride, but the guy refused. In fact, he didn't want to go with him because he had other plans. After saying goodbye to Director Cao, he realized that he felt very good. He was in a good mood because of the successful deal he had managed to conclude. But when he tried to find his bag with his belongings, he realized that it was no longer there. He had hidden it in a trash can, and at that very moment the city was being cleaned up and his belongings were being taken to the dump. There were strong flashes in the sun all the time, and scientists were observing all this. Airplanes were in the greatest danger because their electronics began to fail. Suddenly, one of the passengers became very ill, and when the flight attendant approached him, she saw a horrific scene. It was forever etched in her memory. Another passenger bit him, so people began to panic and were afraid to continue flying. But it was too late, because in the cockpit, people had long since turned into terrifying mutants. So the plane began to fall. Meanwhile, the main character couldn't catch up with his bag, but he was so tired that he went into a local store to buy some water. The water was too expensive for him, and besides, his phone stopped working. And when he turned it on, he saw 13 missed calls. He had to pay for his own housing. He thought for a long time before calling her, because he had no money. But suddenly, his wife called him herself and started asking a lot of questions. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and yelled at her, because he was losing a good opportunity to make money due to his lack of funds. Yang Jin warned him that if he didn't find $50,000 by the evening, the whole deal would be canceled. Without explaining anything, she hung up. Now he didn't know what to do or where to find such a large sum of money. He had no idea what terrible things were happening in space. There were giant solar flares, which had a huge impact on Earth and all of humanity. This was especially noticeable high above sea level. One group of climbers who were climbing the mountains had no idea what was happening. They moved one after another and kept their usual pace. Suddenly, Yuzu felt ill and began to lose consciousness. The others tried to understand what had happened and wanted to help him. Yuzu tried to speak, but his words were slurred and no one could understand him. Suddenly, he bit his friend who was trying to help him. Meanwhile, everything was calm in the city of Binhai, and no one paid attention to the flashes in the sun. At the company where the main character worked, the working day was coming to an end. Everyone had already left, but he stayed until the very end. And when the lights went out, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. He had to sit under the table the whole time so that his colleagues wouldn't notice him. He was lucky because his boss's office was open. He didn't rush because he knew there were a lot of hidden cameras in the room. So, he had to spend a lot of time hacking into the cameras and turning them off. But nothing worked. The video was of very poor quality, so he couldn't see the password. As it turned out, the director was still at the company and was about to return to his office at that very moment. The main character had scattered books around, so he tried to put everything back the way it was so that no one would notice his presence. Just then, his wife called him, but he was angry, so he just yelled. At that moment, Wang hung up the phone and his wife had to sign the agreement. But he ruined everything again. Nothing worked out, and the man was just angry about the time he had to spend. Yang Jin wanted him to stay. She wanted to try to explain everything, but no one listened to her. Suddenly, an unknown man appeared and greeted them. Yang Jin seemed to know him and was very surprised when she saw the guy in front of her. He introduced himself as her boyfriend and apologized for being late, and said he was going to give her the 50,000 needed for the deal. The man was very happy, but Yang Jin's face showed surprise and fear. But the stranger reassured her it was his plan. Meanwhile, Wang had only one attempt left to enter the password. Otherwise, the system would lock up. He tensed up and still managed to do it. Now he had to find the file and send it to the flash drive, but suddenly he heard the director's voice approaching his office. The boy was very frightened because the large file would not have time to be sent before he entered. Strange things were happening not only in the mountains or on planes. The same thing was happening at bus stations. The security guards who worked there felt very ill, and strange things were happening to their bodies. Their skin color changed, and they were constantly tormented by fatigue and nausea. One of the workers fell to his knees, and another tried to help him. The man wanted to help him up. But as soon as he approached his friend, the latter immediately lunged at him and bit off a piece of flesh. The men ended up under the wheels of a heavy train. A terrible tragedy had occurred. As it turned out, the director had brought a girl with him with whom he wanted to spend the night. He thought there was no one in the office, so he intended to lock himself in his office. They started kissing, without even going inside. Wang hid right under the table and watched what was happening. After a few hours, it was over. Now he had a chance to escape. Wang crawled out from under the table and tried to run, but he couldn't. A girl saw him and started screaming in fear. The director was angry when he saw him, but Wang tried to convince him that he had returned to work even harder. After what happened, he just went home and left the office. His thoughts wouldn't leave him alone, and he couldn't forget what he had seen. And if he got fired because of what happened, his family would be on the verge of poverty because he was the only one who could earn money. He came back very late, but no one was home. His wife didn't meet him, so he just wanted to go to his room to go to bed. But suddenly, the lights came on in the house. Wang was very frightened because he thought they were criminals. In fact, it was Yang Jin who had been waiting for him at home the whole time. Wang promised to find the money so they could pay for the house, but he spent it on stocks, which ended up crashing. In addition, he took money from their family savings, which was needed for Yang Jin's father's surgery. He did not have the best relationship with her parents because from the very beginning, they did not like him at all. It seemed that Yang Jin was only now beginning to understand them, and was also angry with her husband, whom she once loved so much. Now he started talking about his father, who, unlike hers, had never been a gangster and had never killed anyone. These words hurt her deeply, so she started calling him names and pressuring him again. Wang couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't listen to her anymore, so he wanted to hit her. But at the last moment, he stopped. Yang Jin no longer loved him and couldn't stand to be around him, so she wanted to break up. So she just packed her things and left their house. Suddenly, she ran into that same man. He returned the phone she had left in his car. It started raining, so he offered her a ride. Yang Jin thought he was very suspicious, but she agreed anyway. She got into his car and accepted the help he offered. The next day, the main character was spending time at home. However, his phone started ringing off the hook. He was receiving a bunch of messages about a dangerous flu, so he was advised to stay home. His mother knew that he was going to buy a house, but Wang lost all his money and now didn't know what to say. He understood that he had lost everything: his family, his money, his wonderful wife, and his future. Now his life had changed, and his mother hated him for what he had done. Wang tried to remain calm, but he simply couldn't take it anymore. He smashed his phone so he wouldn't have to hear her voice anymore. He did nothing until evening and didn't even leave the house, so he slept until morning. But he woke up because he remembered he was late for work. He also realized that he shouldn't rush, because this was probably his last day. 20 minutes later, he was rushing to the company because he remembered that he needed to pick up his things. At first, he was going to enter quietly so as not to attract attention, but he didn't succeed. Also, the director was looking for him and was waiting for him in his office at that very moment. Wang was very scared, but he had no other choice, so he decided to go to him. The young man braced himself, thinking that at that moment he would receive a severe punishment. The director shook his hand, and at that moment, the young man held his breath. But everything changed when the director announced that he had been appointed the new head of their strategic department. He was completely surprised, but Wang couldn't pass up this opportunity and agreed to take the new position. He hadn't expected this at all, so he thanked the man for the promotion. As he left the office, he was greeted by a crowd applauding the new head of the strategic department. This day was special for him because he had long dreamed of becoming the head of an entire department. He wanted to share the news with his wife, but he didn't dare to call her first after what had happened. When his phone rang, Wang thought it was her and was very happy. However, the number was unknown, and he did not know who it really was. But it was an insurance company announcing a new type of insurance. Wang did not have a car, so when he heard them, he became very angry. Yang Jin lay alone in bed and thought about what had happened. She also began to miss her husband, and when the phone rang, she was very happy. She thought it was him. It was her mother, to whom she told everything that had happened. In addition, she learned that her father had fallen ill, but it was just the flu, and her mother assured her that everything would be fine. Cases of an unknown infection continued in the city, and soon many people were coming to the hospital. There were even cases of infection on the street. It happened to a man who couldn't get up and go home. When they tried to help him, they noticed that something was wrong with his face. It scared his friend very much. Now he rushed at him and began to bite, tearing pieces of flesh from his face and neck. Meanwhile, the main character overslept for work again. But now he couldn't be late because he was the boss. The news was not encouraging. There were many new cases of virus infection being reported around the world. Many people were dying and disappearing. There were too many people on the bus, so the main character felt sick. He needed to get some fresh air. Suddenly, among the crowd, he saw a very strange woman who was biting others. Her face had changed. It was covered in bloodstains. People began to panic and run away because there were a huge number of infected people, and they were all attacking and killing people. Everyone was trying to save their lives. But besides the sick people, there was another danger. Animals had also caught the virus and were infected. The sick mutants caught up with people and tore them to pieces, leaving no chance to hide or escape. Dogs bit off parts of their bodies, causing severe pain. But it was just a dream that the man had. He was so scared that he sweated, and his wife tried to bring him to his senses. She was very scared when she saw him in such a state. But he didn't understand anything and didn't know if it was really happening. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Halloween that evening, so they decided it was children coming for candy. And in order to scare them too, they put on costumes and went to open the door. But behind the door, it was much scarier. They were real mutants, ready to tear them to pieces. They attacked people who didn't even suspect anything and began to bite them and tear off pieces of flesh. Panic and screams broke out throughout the city. The mutants were everywhere, even in the water. People knew nothing about the new virus and the epidemic, so, unaware of the danger, they were relaxing on the beach. Suddenly, a girl began to drown. The boy who was next to her was very frightened. To help her, he ran into the water and tried to save her. He didn't know what danger awaited him in the water. And at that moment, the zombies started biting him. The man didn't understand anything and thought it was a shark, but now his life was doomed. In addition, the news reported discouraging information about the consequences of solar flares. Wang felt very ill again, but finally he managed to get to work. He hurried inside because he was half an hour late. Now, the director was looking for him. As it turned out, they wanted to fire him. In addition, the director decided to frame him and accused him of sexually harassing all the female employees in their department. Wang couldn't believe what he was hearing because he hadn't done anything and hadn't even spent a single day in his new position. The man didn't even deny that he was trying to pin the blame on him. He had to save his reputation and preserve the company at all costs. After all, only Wang knew what was going on in the company. He was the only witness. Now, the director had prepared a huge list of accusations against him with the names of his victims. The young man didn't even know many of them. Now his life was ruined. The director threatened to fire him and also planned to sue him for trying to steal information. Instead, he offered to let the boy go if he kept quiet and didn't tell anyone what had happened. Meanwhile, Yang Jin was invited to a special conference, which was very prestigious. She went there with her new friend, who had become a real star because he was very experienced and intelligent. They drank with him to a bright future. The events moved to the main character's house, which was also infected with zombies. The evil creatures even attacked dogs. They bit them and tore their bodies to pieces. Nothing could stop them. And very quickly, the infection spread throughout the city and the whole world. And when the main character returned to his own house, He saw with his own eyes all the horror that was happening there. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. Was it really happening? And it wasn't a dream? Fear gripped him. He knew that an ordinary old man lived in the house, who could never harm anyone. The next day, he managed to overcome his fear and convince himself that it wasn't real. He went looking for a new job because he had no money. Before that, he went to a meeting with his client and accused him of the flash drive not being reliable because the director had found out about everything. He wanted the client to confess everything himself or pay him damages and hire him. However, the man promised to recommend the protagonist to another company, which was a large corporation. Wang had no other options, so he trusted him again. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a strange man who was riding with him on the bus. He immediately noticed that the old man was ill, and when he lost consciousness, everyone thought that Wang had pushed him. They were about to help him when suddenly the old man started biting the people around him. Wang couldn't believe his eyes. Again, that same color of his face and the same aggressive behavior he had seen before. He saw the old man begin to turn into a mutant, so he had to jump back to avoid putting himself in danger and ending up in the danger zone. Wang saw with his own eyes how the old man bit off the fingers of one of the women. Meanwhile, the relationship between Yang Jin and her new acquaintance was developing rapidly. Hu Haoran asked her out on a date in the middle of the workday. Then he confessed that he liked her very much and felt a strong attraction to her. He wanted her to be his girlfriend and considered himself a successful man who could take care of her and provide for her. But even at that moment, she was thinking about her ex and really wanted to call him. However, the main character's phone was turned off, so he did not answer her calls. Therefore, she decided to try again and took Hu Haoran's phone. But even that didn't help, which meant that the main character's phone had stopped working. She thought about Hu Haoran's proposal for a long time, which made him very nervous. Still, she agreed to be with him and become his girlfriend. Hu Haoran was so happy about this that he hugged her. He believed that she liked him too. But in reality, she didn't love him and just burst into tears because she realized that she wasn't sincere towards him. Nevertheless, she was able to calm down and stopped crying. But when she looked up, she saw Wang in front of her, who had seen everything and was just looking at them. At the space station, they tried to determine the strength of the solar flares and investigate their impact on humanity. Now, the flares had reached their maximum level of danger, so they were going to send an urgent message to the government. In addition, the flares were so strong that they reached the planet in a matter of minutes. As a result, people on Earth could see the aurora borealis on all continents. They had no idea what this meant and what danger it posed. Because of the solar flares, many people turned into zombies and all hell broke loose in the city. People screamed and begged to be saved. They tried to run away, but it was useless. The zombies killed everyone in their path. The police officers who tried to stop them couldn't do anything. At that moment, Cao was riding in a taxi. He had thought everything through and was going to destroy the main character. Suddenly, he felt something strange happening to him. His driver didn't suspect anything until the man started screaming, drawing attention to himself. But as soon as the taxi driver turned around to see what had happened, Cao bit him and began tearing pieces of flesh from his face. The car skidded, and they were involved in a terrible accident right in the middle of the city. Meanwhile, the main character couldn't stop thinking about his wife and what had happened. It hurt him to realize that she was with someone else. He considered her a traitor who had fallen in love with another man only for money. The guy drank a lot and looked at their photos together. He cried and couldn't calm down. In such a terrible state, he fell asleep and slept until morning. The next morning, he felt very bad and exhausted and tired. He needed some fresh air, so he decided to go out onto the balcony. But as soon as he got out of bed, he felt terrible pain all over his body. However, he noticed some very strange sounds coming from the neighboring balcony. There was a girl with a covered face. She asked him to save her and was looking for shelter. He was so frightened that he fell to the ground and couldn't understand anything. He witnessed her own husband attack her and start cutting her body into pieces, and everything around her was covered in blood. The guy tried to call the police to stop the attacker and try to save her life. But the line was busy, so he decided to try all the other numbers he knew. But even that didn't help, because no one answered and he couldn't get through to anyone. Suddenly, he heard the voices of other neighbors who were gathering their belongings and trying to leave the house. He rushed over to them because he wanted to ask for help and figure out what was really going on. People were talking about zombies and the apocalypse that had come upon the world, so they wanted to leave the city and find a safe place for themselves. The main character couldn't believe what was happening and what it really was. He had to return to his apartment, and closing the door behind him, he realized what was really happening to the people he had seen. Now he understood that they were turning into zombies and that it wasn't actually the flu, but a much more terrifying infection. At that moment, he heard the terrible screams of the crowd on the street and saw with his own eyes the horror that was taking place. After what he saw, Wang tried to pull himself together, but he was convinced that what he saw was just an illusion. There were many different thoughts in his head, but it was clear that he needed to pull himself together and calm down. The boy couldn't feel his legs when suddenly he heard a terrible scream on the street. The voice was very familiar, and he quickly realized that it was his neighbors, whom he had just seen. Wang saw with his own eyes how they died and how a huge crowd of hungry zombies tore them to pieces. Now he began to feel very nervous. It was very dangerous in his apartment, because at any moment strangers could break in and kill him. In order to find out the extent of the disaster, he turned on the news, but even now, the news was old. Suddenly, there was another strange sound. This time it was soldiers and helicopters flying over the city. The hero tried to signal them, but no one noticed him, and the planes just flew past his house. The news reported that martial law had been imposed, and that the virus was spreading at an incredible rate. Wang began to panic. He didn't know what to do. None of his contacts were answering his calls. The boy tried to pull himself together, calm down, and start thinking. In order to signal for help and save himself, he was going to use a white sheet, which would attract attention. He also gathered all the pens and pencils he could find in his house. In addition, he was going to use paint, and in huge letters he managed to send a signal for help. He also planned to use the pot to attract attention, and now he just had to wait for the new helicopters to arrive. The events moved to the police station. The police and military were unable to contain the epidemic and stop the spread of the virus. The news was again disappointing, as many police officers had died in the fight against the zombies. Even the chief felt very ill because he had been bitten, and the color of his face was beginning to change. Suddenly, he began to speak incoherently and fell headfirst onto the table. A few seconds later, he also turned into a horrible mutant and tried to kill his assistant. She tried to resist, but she had very little chance of surviving. Meanwhile, Wang continued to wait for rescue, but even his large sign did not work. It was very quiet around him because his TV had stopped working. The lights were turned off in the city, and he understood that after that, the water could also be turned off, so he needed to stock up on food. He managed to collect only half a bucket of water, which would only last a few days. After that, he would simply die. At night, he heard terrible sounds coming from the street, and it was driving him crazy. But amid the growling, he heard the voices of living people begging for help. They were his neighbors, who couldn't take it anymore and decided to commit suicide. A man he knew well jumped out of the window and died from the fall. The main character thought about doing the same and was already preparing to jump. But at the last moment, he changed his mind because he didn't want to die so easily and was afraid of death. Suddenly, a notification came to his phone, and he rushed to check what it was. It was a message from his mother, who was very worried about him and was staying in a shelter where it was safe. Now that his mother was alive, he couldn't let her die and had to find her at any cost. Several days had passed since the beginning of the terrible epidemic, but he still hadn't been able to send the message. All this time he had to spend in his apartment without electricity and water. Wang managed to gather all the necessary things for consumption and what he might need on the street. He used a survival guide and was able to make a rope for himself. At that moment, he remembered his neighbors who had committed suicide, so their apartment was empty. The main character was going to take advantage of this and try to find food and other supplies. Therefore, he began to move towards their apartment. But due to his excitement, he fell and almost fell down. A woman noticed him and he asked her for help, but she just walked away without paying any attention to him. Nevertheless, he managed to gather his strength and get into someone else's apartment. He tried to examine the jackets and find a way to get out of it. But there were many more zombies in the hallway than on the street, so he also had to move through the balcony. He was lucky because his neighbors had a lot of clothes that could be used as rope. After searching, he managed to get to his house and was going to sort through everything he had found. He managed to make a long rope out of the clothes, which he was going to use to escape and search for his mother in his house. Now he needed to find food, and he was going to go to his neighbor's house again. There were many valuable things there that could be used to stop bleeding. He managed to find medicine and other medical supplies. So the hero was satisfied and was able to carry 2 full bags of supplies out of the apartment. Suddenly, he smelled a very strong odor of gas. He realized that it was coming from the apartment where the man had jumped out and committed suicide. He tried to warn the woman about the strong smell of gas, but she did not listen to him and just stared at his face. Suddenly, she took out a lighter, and then he realized what she really wanted to do. It became clear that she was going to blow herself and her house up. And now, the main character was in mortal danger. When she lit the lighter, there was a loud explosion that completely destroyed her apartment. The guy fell to the ground, covering his head with his hands, but he couldn't stop the fire. So he had to quickly gather his things and leave his own house because soon the flames would take over everything. Slowly, he began to descend, watching the flames spread throughout the building. Suddenly, his apartment also began to burn, and there was an explosion even louder than the previous one. As a result, he began to fall. However, he was very lucky because the rope got caught on the balcony and slowed him down. Wang fell painfully to the ground, but he did not suffer any serious injuries. However, there was something else. something much more dangerous. Because at that moment, he fell right on top of the zombie, which was now lying beneath him. The boy tried to run away, because now he was risking his own life. But his sheets were tangled in the dead bodies of the monsters. Therefore, this prevented him from escaping. He covered his face with his hands in fear, but nothing happened. The mutant did not attack him, but simply lay on the ground. But Wang quickly realized that he had killed it with his fall, so now the zombie was no longer a threat to him. He needed to find a knife to free himself when suddenly, he heard the voice of a living person. It was a man who was trying to escape from the crowd of zombies and was calling for help. But now it was too late. The hero did not have time to save him, and the crowd of dead people surrounded him and began to devour him alive. His legs hurt so much that he could not stand, but he had to endure it for the sake of salvation. While the zombies weren't paying attention to him, it was his chance to escape, which he was going to take advantage of. But as soon as he started running, he tripped over one of the mutants standing in his way. Wang was lucky again. At the last moment, he managed to jump out of the way and stay alive. Now he tried to run away, but all the mutants started chasing him. After a few minutes, he finally managed to break away from them and hide. He understood that he needed to be more careful and check the path ahead of him. Right in front of him was a market, and the smell was so terrible that there were no zombies or living people nearby. All the food was spoiled and rotten, but he managed to find a very old and dangerous knife. So he decided to take it with him so that he could defend himself if necessary. But as soon as he left the market, a new danger appeared on his path. In front of him was a huge army of mutants who surrounded the poor people and tore them to pieces. They immediately noticed him and were about to start chasing him. The main character tried to hide, but suddenly almost fell into the jaws of a hungry dog. But he was lucky because the dog was held back by a chain, which prevented it from biting him. The mutants did not pay attention to the dog's barking, and the pursuit continued. In addition, they also saw the poor dog, which they scared very much. And they ate it! Wang tried to confuse the mutants, so he moved through the narrow alleys of the city. He realized that the mutants were not very agile and could not turn around, but there was a high wall in front of him. The boy could not climb over it, and the door there was closed, so he tried to call for help. Now he began to say goodbye to life and was ready to kill himself because he believed that it would ease his suffering. But at the last moment, he stopped again. He didn't have the courage to kill himself. Suddenly, a miracle happened because the door to the house opened. A stranger appeared before him, but he frightened the main character so much that he was ready to stab him with his own knife in order to protect himself. It was a woman who let him inside and closed the door so that the mutants couldn't get in. But she couldn't do it because they started selling out. Her husband arrived just in time to save her. He managed to close the door and stop the mutants from getting inside. The boy was so frightened that he couldn't get up and believe what had happened to him. People tried to calm him down and wanted to take him to their apartment, which was on the second floor. A few minutes later, they told him that they also had a son who had gone out to look for supplies and had not returned. They saw that the boy was injured and wanted to help him. But it was only a small cut, so everything was fine. The people offered him food and help because they had plenty of supplies. They had also learned how to obtain drinking water, which they stored in bottles in a special room. In addition, they had a lot of concerts that they had saved in case of war. But the main character was hungry, so they decided to feed him. Cool! The front door opened and their son came home. He didn't want the main character to stay in their house because there weren't enough supplies for everyone. The boy, who overheard their conversation, was going to leave and not stay. But he knew that it was getting dark outside and there were a lot of evil mutants there, so it was very dangerous. And just as he was about to leave, they stopped him because they understood that it was indeed very dangerous there. The boy thanked them for allowing him to stay for one night. His mother prepared dinner and the boy wanted to help. He had special multivitamins, which he decided to share. At a time when they couldn't eat properly, vitamins could be very useful. It was known that the situation could not be resolved and it was out of control. The government did not think about ordinary people because it was possible to use the entire army to stop this hell. Many days had passed since the beginning of the epidemic, but the military had not yet appeared in their city. The man knew that the government was solving its own problems and that the only way to save themselves was to join the rebels. All they could do now was run away, but if they joined the rebels, they would get weapons and shelter. But to do that, they would need to be physically fit and pass many tests. Suddenly, his parents entered the room. It was time to sleep, so they were going to show Wang his bed. And their son promised to show him a safe way out the next day. In bed, he heard zombies outside surrounding the house. They calmed down when they couldn't find any living people. Soon, the military would take control of the situation, but no one knew how long it would take. In fact, it was a lie that his son had made up to reassure his parents. Wang couldn't believe his ears. He was very disappointed, so he left his home and risked his life just to find his mother and try to save her. The news was not comforting. and he had no strength left. The next morning, he was about to leave the house of the kind people who had given him a towel and some magazines. They were necessary for him to make new protection for himself. The man began to show him a safe way, which was to walk along the fire exits. In front of them was a fence with a wide hole that he could crawl through. Just in case, he gave Wang a knife so that he could protect himself. The main character thanked him for his kindness and decided to move on. He also had a small ladder that he could use to climb back up whenever he wanted. Lee helped him climb down and decided to inspect the house to see if it was safe. He managed to distract all the mutants and give the boy a chance to leave the house. They all ran after him. This gave him the opportunity to escape and avoid the mutants, so he immediately took advantage of it. Once on the ground, the boy began to run, trying to reach the fence before the mutants heard him. First, he threw his bag over to the other side. Then he tried to squeeze through the narrow opening himself. Suddenly, the mutants began to approach him and almost grabbed his clothes. They tore his clothes, but did not manage to injure or bite him. Now Wang tried with all his might to escape, and he was very lucky on his way. He found a bicycle, but it turned out to be locked. Wang moved along a wide city street, but there were so many mutants there that he almost died again. He had to hide under a car, but even there were zombies. He had no other choice, so he had to try to climb a tall crane. He realized that he had no way to get down because the mutants were starting to surround him. At that moment, he had already said goodbye to life because he thought he would not be able to save himself. He found himself at the very top and could not even believe that he had managed to climb up there so quickly. From the height, he could see the whole city. However, the mutants were not going to leave him alone and tried to climb onto the crane. However, there were so many of them that the metal frame could not withstand the weight and everything fell onto the neighboring building. He hit the concrete hard, but did not suffer any serious injuries. His whole body was covered in bruises and scratches. But when he tried to move, he realized there was a knife near his neck. Wang raised his hands, thinking that his end had come and that he was about to be brutally killed. As it turned out, it was a soldier named Yu Shun. The hero thought that the man was trying to save him, but that was not the case. He was on a dangerous mission, escorting politicians, but during the flight, he was left behind. He was the only one who managed to stay alive. He had to sit on the roof of the house for several days, and his unit had no supplies or resources. The weather changed dramatically and it started to burn, so they decided to go inside the house. The soldier had a leg injury, so the main character helped him walk and move around. They didn't know what danger awaited them at home, so they tried to check all the rooms on their way. The boy was about to open the door and look inside. However, at the last moment, the soldier tried to stop him. Inside was an unknown man with a weapon. In addition, there were many other people there who were also hiding and were very surprised to see a live police officer. They allowed them to come inside where they had plenty of water supplies. People tried to come up with a plan, but they didn't believe that they would all be able to survive. The main character knew that when the virus entered the body, the patient needed a lot of food to provide energy, which is why all the mutants were aggressive. The virus was not transmitted through water or air. It could only be contracted through direct contact with fluids such as blood. Despite the fact that there was a lot of food, there was almost none left for the people. In addition, it was known that there were many more living people in the West because the population there had always been smaller. The main character suggested staying in his city, after which one of the men attacked him. The leader of the crowd stood up for him and tried to punish the offender. He strangled the man until he apologized. To begin with, Yushin suggested that everyone go to the closed area because it was safer there. The boy noticed that Sun Dashing's phone was working and he needed to use it. He wanted to call his mother, but he couldn't remember her number. Sun Dashing tried to calm him down because he just needed to wait for his phone to charge. Suddenly, Wang saw tears appear on his face. When he remembered his own mother, he burst into tears because he also didn't know if something had happened to her. He tried to call her several times, but nothing worked. The man knew about Wang's past job and that he had been fired for stealing data, and everyone knew about his affair with his secretary. But now, his boss was dead, and it could be considered his revenge. Suddenly, a police officer came in and asked the young man to have a serious conversation. They had to go to a separate room. The man showed him techniques that could be used to get rid of the mutants and try to escape. Now he knew how to get out of captivity and free himself from his surroundings. And when something happened, he would be able to react immediately. He had to keep practicing until he could withstand a large number of mutants and easily escape from them. The next morning, the man tried to apologize for his behavior, or he was released. Today, they were going to check the 18th floor, which he had mentioned earlier, because that was where valuable resources and food could be found. Through the glass doors, they could see the shadows of a huge number of mutants, so they had to move very carefully. If the zombies saw them, the chase would begin and they would find themselves surrounded. When the people entered the elevator, an unpleasant surprise awaited them inside. When the mutant almost bit the fat man, he wanted to scream, but his mouth was covered. Because of him, the people were spotted, and now the chase began. One of the mutants, who got too close, had to be killed with a knife to the head. When the fat man saw his dead body, he couldn't calm down again and started crying. The mutant attacked him, while the others tried to save his life. The men tried to find weapons, but there was nothing there except tools. In addition, there were two ways to leave the building, as there were two different routes. Route B seemed safer, as they had used it before, and it was located near the freight elevator. To keep people from talking, the policeman showed them several signals. People had to respond to them in time and remember what each one meant. He also taught them how to indicate the direction in which the enemies were located. And now, when they were ready and had found weapons for themselves, they were going to continue their dangerous journey. Suddenly, the fat man started running away from the people. They tried to stop him, but he simply slipped past them. Now he closed the door on the other side. He broke the lock so that they could not get out, and now his friends were in mortal danger from the mutants, without weapons or water. In addition, he was going to release the zombies, of which there were many on the floor. The people had no choice, and while the fat man was carrying out his plan, they tried to find a way out. But a deadly danger appeared in their path, a crowd of mutants moving straight toward them. The people did not know what to do because they had no weapons. The only solution was to try to push them back in order to close the door. In addition, the main character's knife was so small that he could not kill a mutant with it. The monster pounced on him and the hero ended up on the ground. Meanwhile, the people managed to push the mutants back and close the door, blocking it with everything they had at hand. The main character continued to resist and call for help, but at the last moment, he was saved. Sun Dasheng helped him and destroyed the monster that was trying to bite his friend. His face was covered in blood, and he could hear the main character continuing to scream. Now he couldn't take it anymore, because his screams were only attracting the attention of even more mutants. If he started screaming again, the men promised to leave him behind. When everyone was able to calm down, they continued on, exploring the house. Ahead, they saw a mutant standing in the middle of the room. Suddenly, the zombie smelled them and began to attack. Besides him, there were other monsters, so now the people were in new danger. They began to turn back and tried to lock themselves in the elevator. But it was a bad plan because the zombies could get inside and they had to hold the door with their hands. In addition, the elevator was turned off and they had to figure out a way to turn it on. If they could open the door, then they would have a chance of survival. When the main character tried to get inside, he saw that something was wrong with his friends. Suddenly, they had turned into horrible mutants. Now the danger was inside, and while the others tried to open the door, the zombies were killing people. Wong thought that now he would definitely die, because they couldn't open the door. Suddenly everything worked out, and he tried with all his might to get downstairs to save his own life. The zombies tried to grab him, but at the last moment he had to dodge, but the mutant followed him. Wong tried to push him away and injure him. Suddenly they heard a rumbling sound. Due to the enormous overload, the elevator began to fall, and the people inside risked dying. The elevator hit the ground, but they were lucky to survive. Despite the fact that the zombie had lost part of its body, it remained alive and was now trying to kill them. However, the men managed to stop it and everyone was safe and sound. They were very lucky because the elevator had emergency brakes that activated at that moment and were able to soften the fall. Now they were on the 10th floor, and they needed to get out of the elevator as quickly as possible. Wong carefully opened the door to check what was inside, but it was dangerous to move forward because there were many mutants and dead bodies in the corridor. They had to sit there for an hour, and after that time, the main character felt very bad. But fortunately, the policeman had a new idea. They found fire hoses that they could use to try to climb down a few floors. It was their only way out, otherwise they would not be able to get through. While the others held the rope, the man began to slowly descend. On the 6th floor, he broke the glass and was now able to get inside. Then the girls began to descend. Now it was the main character's turn, but due to severe fatigue, he could not do it quickly enough. Yushen was the last one and managed to do it faster, even with an injured leg. Next, they decided to go down the stairs because no one had the strength to move along the rope. The policeman went first again, but he saw many mutants below. There were also many zombies above, but they didn't seem to notice them. It was very risky, so they had to somehow attract the mutants' attention. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell into the mouth of one of the men. Everyone began to prepare for the worst and lined up in a row. The main character noticed this, but no one else knew anything. The people got ready, and at Yu Shun's command, were about to run. He threw a knife so that the zombies would pay attention to the sound. And when they started to rise, the people ran away. They tried to go down as low as possible, but on the 2nd floor they realized they had to go back. The thing was, there were also a lot of mutants there who started running straight at them. They had to break down the door and lock themselves in one of the rooms. Suddenly, their friend turned into a zombie because of the blood in his mouth. Now he also began to attack people and wanted to tear them to pieces. They had to defend themselves and try to kill him as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, the policemen did it to stop him. They had to leave because it was very dangerous there. There was a large parking lot below, but there were a lot of zombies there, and they would die before they could reach the car. They had to try to distract the zombies, but to do that, they had to turn on the alarm. The main character still had his phone, but it was turned off, so it was possible to use it. But he realized that his dead friend's phone was a phone. Unfortunately, it didn't work either. So the men came up with another plan and took a desperate step to save themselves. They changed their clothes so as not to be infected by their dead father's blood and began to cut up his body. The women were terrified and couldn't bear to watch what was happening. Yushin began to remove his internal organs. After that, the women smeared him with the blood of the dead mutant. They began to lower him down and promised to pull him back up if nothing worked. Wang found himself on the ground, surrounded by a crowd of zombies. He tried to behave as calmly as possible so as not to attract attention, but he failed because the mutants noticed him and now he had to turn back. But he ran in a completely different direction and all the mutants rushed after him. The boy moved toward the car and tried to turn on the alarm. He didn't succeed the first time, so he had to change direction. Suddenly, he saw a car moving in his direction and thought it was his friends. But they didn't stop and just drove on. At that moment, he was very afraid for his life. He couldn't believe that they could leave him so easily. After he got out, the soldier told him about a special quarantine zone that had been set up for civilians. This was the only chance for him to save himself and get to safety. The boy watched the car drive away from him, and now he had completely lost hope. He didn't even notice when the mutants began to approach him, and one of them bit him. However, he managed to stay alive and unharmed again. He had to run away, but he couldn't believe that people could do this to him. He moved as fast as he could, trying to get away from his pursuers. However, he stumbled and fell to the ground at the last moment. He tried to get up as quickly as he could, but he saw that the mutants had surrounded him and there was nowhere to run. But now he was not going to give up because he had to find a solution at any cost. He was lucky to find a car and lock himself inside. The guy hoped that it would work and he would be able to start it. He tried several times, and finally, he succeeded. Now he had his own transportation and could get to the quarantine zone on his own. But there were many mutants in his way, and his car stopped. His seatbelt got caught on his clothes, so he had to take off his pants to free himself. Now he was back on the street and trying to escape. He was happy because he saw that he was getting away from his pursuers. But the hero did not notice that food was falling out of his briefcase. He lost everything he had, leaving him defenseless without food or water. The boy tried to hide and found himself on a glass surface, which was a safe place. But the fragile glass could not withstand his weight, and he began to fall. The boy landed right on the ground and felt intense pain. In addition, he understood that now the mutants had definitely started chasing him and would soon find and tear him to pieces. He tried to hide and move in the opposite direction, but he knew that the mutant had spotted him. They started chasing him again, but soon the boy would be completely exhausted. He tried to find a safe place where he could hide and try to regain his strength. And that place turned out to be a metal trash can, which could serve as a reliable hiding place. He got inside and listened to every sound. The boy prayed that he would not be noticed. The mutants who were chasing him simply ran past and did not stop. However, the smell inside was unbearable, so after waiting for a while, he was forced to leave his hiding place. He managed to find a warehouse with a living girl inside. She did not expect to see a living person in the city at all. It was her hiding place. Terrified, she started screaming and tried to call for help. A policewoman immediately came to her voice, unable to understand what had actually happened. But at that moment, she saw the main character, who was naked and frightened. She began to beat him, and many other people came running at the noise and joined her. They tied him up, but then decided to let him go because he did not look like a pervert or a criminal. Besides, they could not trust him and allow him to stay with them because those times were very dangerous and required caution. People had no food left, so they were going to go out to find food. People tried to come up with a new plan and smoked all the time, but they didn't even realize that it could harm them. Because zombies had a very good sense of smell and reacted immediately to cigarette smoke. That night, people were born to abandon their shelter and just fall asleep. One of the survivors approached the main character. His name was Qian Jin, and he wanted to know the location of the quarantine zone. He said that they were currently in a police station, and that there used to be many more of them. He began to tell the main character about all the people, then released him and unlocked his handcuffs. They were about to escape when suddenly the mutants began to approach them and forced them to do so. A guard was standing on duty, but he didn't even have time to do anything before the zombies tore him to pieces. The man began to scream and everyone else heard his voice. Now they realized that the zombies were approaching them. Qianjin tried to push himself away so that he would not become infected. The main character was very frightened. He could not believe that the mutants could get inside and find people. He tried to resist, but he had to fight one of the zombies. The monster tried to bite him, and out of fear, he started screaming. At the last moment, he managed to gather his strength and kill the mutant that was approaching him. Other people and a policewoman witnessed this. They started screaming in fear because they couldn't believe that the main character, who at first seemed so weak, was capable of this. But that wasn't the end, because other mutants also began to approach. They had to run away as fast as possible because soon they would be in mortal danger. Outside the window, on the street, there was a police car, and if they could get to it, they could drive away and have a chance to stay alive. So they tried to leave the house one by one. But as soon as they were on the street, they saw a real army of mutants approaching them. Wong tried to hold them back with everything he could find. He managed to do it, and now they had to run to the car. One of the people who helped him and left last was caught by the mutants. Now Wong was faced with a difficult choice because he remembered how cruelly his friends had treated him, so he didn't want to do the same. He tried to call for help, but no one wanted to get out of the car and risk their own lives. But it was too late. The man was dead, and Wong did not manage to save him. Now, he tried to catch up with them and jumped right into the window. Sitting in the car, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, because a person had died right before his eyes, and he had done nothing to help. Now they were driving to the policewoman's house, which was not far away, so she was going to turn off the road. There was plenty of water and food in her house, and in a few minutes, they were able to arrive. But when she arrived, she saw that nothing was left of her house. It had burned to the ground. Her parents, who were inside, were now dead, and the entire building had burned to the ground. Suddenly, a man in a truck arrived and warned them that mutants were approaching. He was a firefighter, but he knew that there was no one left alive in the building, so there was no point in putting out the fire. They tried to calm Sun Chen Chen down, but she did not respond. They could not stay there any longer, so they returned to the car. The firefighters had been in the car since the outbreak of the virus, and everyone had died except for one. He tried to help those who were signaling for rescue. Now, the man was going to the quarantine zone because it was safe there. In order to survive the night, they needed to find a shelter, but after the fire, there was nowhere else for people to go. However, Sun Chen Chen managed to remember a place where it was safe. There was even water and a shower there. It had its own gas system and was located in the northern part of the city. So the firefighter agreed to help them and wanted her to show him the way. The hero thought about it. He knew that the mutants reacted to fire and jumped into it as soon as they saw it. They were about to leave, but on their way they encountered many dangerous mutants. The firefighter had a helmet and an axe, and he killed everyone he met on his way. Finally, they found themselves in a safe place. It seemed that everything was clean inside and there were no mutants, but people had to be very careful anyway. They had to close all the windows so that the zombies wouldn't see them. They decided to put their belongings in the corner of the room so that they could grab them quickly in case they had to flee. Just in case, they agreed to use only 2 stalls to save water. Sun Chin Qian couldn't calm down and come to terms with the fact that she had lost her parents and her home. The boy was in the shower for too long, so when it was the other boy's turn, they started arguing. The boys almost got into a fight, neither of them willing to back down. So the firefighter intervened and decided who would have the right to wash first. The main character was very tired and wanted to sleep, but all the best places in the house were taken. The last thing he wanted was to sleep on the floor. The next day, they continued walking down the deserted street. There were more and more zombies, so the road was very dangerous. When people appeared on the street, it became clear that they were armed, so it was risky to stop. The main character witnessed a fierce battle. He tried to tell the old man that he had to hit the mutants in the head, because that was the only way to stop them. The boy told the man about the mutants and from which side they attacked him. Now he had a better chance of winning. Blood could not be allowed to get into his eyes and mouth, because then he would also become infected. But it seemed that the man knew this when he killed all the mutants and then introduced himself. It was Li Hongxing, who was the guard of the local cemetery. In the past, he was a soldier and participated in many wars, as can be seen from his paintings and photos. In fact, he was blind because he lost his sight in the war. Li Hongxing had lived like this for many years, so he was already used to it and felt normal. However, the zombies were approaching them. The people wanted to leave, but the main character could not abandon the old man. He wanted to try to help him. If death was inevitable, then it should be dignified, he believed. He tried to persuade the old man to go with them, but to no avail. But the old man did not want to leave his own home. Military service had taught him true human virtues, and he was not afraid of death. He remembered well the day when he almost died and lost his sight. He left his sick father at home with no one to take care of him. After returning, he supported and cared for him until his death. But now, he was left alone, and everything in this house reminded him of his father and felt familiar. Meanwhile, the zombies were getting closer and closer. Their car overturned and the men tried to fix it. But there was very little time. The zombies were approaching, and Wong had to fight them off with his own briefcase. He had no other choice, so he asked the old man for help. The old man silently went out into the street and prepared himself. He took out his sword and prepared to kill anyone who approached him. Li Hongxing tried to buy some time for the people and give them a chance to get as far away from the city as possible. Meanwhile, outside the police station, there were still a lot of mutants. They couldn't contact the people who were still inside the building and couldn't leave. They had a fire ladder, so they could try to reach the window. But before they started, they decided to wait until evening so that the mutants would calm down. They stopped right in front of the house and sat quietly in the truck. The most crucial moment of their plan had arrived, and after making sure that everything was clear, they were about to go out into the street. But when the ladder was raised, it made a lot of noise, so it could attract the attention of the zombies. Therefore, they first decided to try to turn on the alarms on the distant cars, and only then move on to the main part of the plan. The main character went to the cars, and after a few seconds, the alarms went off. And when everything was ready, he returned to the people. It worked, and when the mutants were distracted, the people were able to get inside the house. But still, they were able to attract the attention of those who were closest. The monsters began to approach, but the firefighter killed them one by one. He couldn't hold out for long, so the people had to hurry. They managed to reach the ladder, and the old man tried to kill them with his own sword. He couldn't see anything, so he almost fell from a great height. But the hero managed to grab him and saved his life. Li Hongxing felt very uncomfortable in an unfamiliar place, so he couldn't get his bearings. There were so many mutants that soon they would kill the man and be able to break through. Therefore, Wang returned to help him and save the man's life. Only after that did he also begin to climb inside the house. When they were inside, they closed the windows and hid. They could only hope that the mutants would not storm the house. But they were wrong. The zombies tried to get inside through the front door. They were everywhere and managed to surround them. Now Wang's theory was confirmed. He had long suspected that zombies only attacked the target they saw and heard. So now, they could be safe because they were out of sight. They just needed to be careful and not be seen. A little more, and they would all have been dead. But when they got inside, they noticed that there was no one there except for 2 police officers. All their friends were dead, and those who managed to stay were sent on special missions to eliminate the threat. Now, they couldn't go back because there were zombies on the roof, at the doors, and at the windows. In addition, the police officers had no weapons or ammunition. The only thing they had was a small storeroom with unique equipment and a couple of confiscated pistols. It was better than nothing, but it was too late because there were too many zombies in the hallway. Now, they tried to come up with a new plan because the situation seemed very difficult. However, there were no walls between the rooms, which meant that it would not be difficult to break through them. So they made a narrow passage for themselves and were able to get into the storage room with supplies. Suddenly, the girl walking behind them started screaming and begging for help. Something started pulling her back, so Wang had to hold on to her. She began to fall to the lower floor, and Wang realized that he did not have the strength to hold her. He called out to the others, but he knew that he himself was in danger of falling. Just then, the mutants began to attack him and tried to bite his legs. He was saved, but he almost died. He also helped her get out, and the girl thanked him for saving her. Finally, they managed to reach their destination. It was a spacious room with many shelves filled with various items and food. The only weapon left was a rubber baton, so he decided to take it. But the old man suggested that he take a pitchfork, as he thought it would suit him best. In addition, there were many useful tools, including some that could be used to unlock doors. Now they had all the necessary equipment, body armor, and boots, and it was time to think about returning. The main character wanted Stride to teach him military tactics and tell him how they could get out of the encirclement. It was obvious that zombies were not intelligent, and if people acted together, they could win. The police knew how to stop the uprising. To do this, they had to follow certain instructions and do everything at the same time. The men would have to protect each other and cover themselves from all sides. And now that they had a new tactic, they prepared to go out into the street and be ready for battle. In the corridor, they encountered the first mutant, and he immediately rushed at them. The police officer was so frightened that he fell to the ground, risking his life. The old man saved his life again and helped him up. Now, they gathered themselves and tried again, because they had to stop the terrible threat somehow. The old man tried to do everything he could. There were too many mutants, and the people could not withstand the onslaught, so they decided to retreat. At the same time, they tried to do everything possible to keep the monsters away from them and prevent them from biting them. The main character fought with them, and now his fear was almost gone. They tried to retreat slowly, maintaining their formation and not panicking. The people were only alive because they helped each other. One of the policemen thought he had been bitten, but the old man saved him by cutting off the monster's head at the last moment. The door was locked, and the firefighter wanted to break it down, but the boy stopped him. The mutants began to approach, and Qianjin tried to open the door with a set of tools. However, the policeman was wounded. The head, separated from the zombie's body, could bite, and very hard. It was obvious that it was impossible to help him and that the unfortunate man had to be killed before he himself turned into a mutant. He was human now, but after a while, he would turn into a zombie and attack them. But now, they managed to get inside and people tried to block the door. They were very nervous, but after a while, the zombies retreated and calmed down. Now they argued because they didn't know what to do with the wounded man. But none of them had the right to do so, so the man had to choose for himself what fate awaited him. In fact, he did not want to die, but he knew that he had behaved like a coward, and he did not want to be killed by them. He asked them to leave him there, but they simply had no other choice. Suddenly, they noticed the ventilation system that connected all the rooms in the house. The wounded man began to feel unwell. He felt that his transformation had begun. He tried to resist, but he understood that death was too close. Still, he wanted to die like a normal person, so he broke the window. The man shouted to everyone, telling them about himself while he could still speak. Hearing him, the mutants began to run towards the house. They tried to reach him, so they abandoned the ladder and the car. The main character understood that the guy was doing this for them, and so they had a chance to be saved. They had to run away, so trying not to make any noise, they left the house. Now they were inside and tried to slowly lower the ladder. The man drove back slowly, but did not notice that there were zombies there too. They had to run away again because they had made too much noise. In addition, a new problem arose. There was too little gasoline, and without electricity, which was unavailable throughout the city, they would not be able to refuel. However, there should have been generators at gas stations. They drove up to the gas station and did not even suspect that they were being watched the whole time. The angry man was ready to kill them because he hated everyone who came near him. He was obsessed and believed that everyone wanted his money, so he would not let them go for anything in the world. Meanwhile, Lee's parents were gradually running out of food at home. Now, this became a problem for them. Lee's father had to contact the military, but they couldn't pick him up. They had to find a way to get to the airport themselves. That was the only condition under which they could be picked up. But it was very dangerous to go there, and besides, Yang Jin's niece was with them. They offered her to stay at home, but they would never return. Their father was very influential, so this decision was only for people like him. He wanted the whole family to leave, and no one to stay here in this dangerous place. The family began to pack their belongings, and the father prepared his weapons. He understood that relations with his colleagues were only a matter of time. The girl did not want to leave her home, but she understood that it was necessary. Now there was no time left, and they had to go. Special vehicles that could withstand even bullets were prepared for the journey. With their help, it was easy to crush the mutants. Even a large number of zombies posed no threat to them. But despite this, the driver tried to avoid them because he was always cautious. But when there were more mutants, he simply had no other choice. Ahead was the most dangerous part of the road because it was very dark and he could hardly see anything. There were many dead bodies under the wheels of the car. He did not have time to avoid them, so his car overturned. The noise attracted the attention of the zombies that were nearby. People tried to leave the car, but realized that the mutants were approaching them. In order to hold them back, he had to open fire, not even expecting that the sound of gunshots would attract other zombies. The man was going to distract the mutants to give his parents a chance to escape. They were worried about him, but the man assured them that he could take care of himself. He would soon run out of ammunition, so he had to do everything possible to get their attention. So he started screaming. All the mutants ran in his direction, and now his parents had the opportunity to leave and hide in a safe place. They helped Yang Jin get out of the car, but couldn't help the security guard. There was no need to worry, because they considered him a master of his craft and knew he would definitely return. Meanwhile, the heroes at the gas station used the same tactic and turned on the alarm on one of the cars. They were lucky because the gas station had a backup generator that they could use. But as soon as they started it, it would make noise and turn on the lights. Before starting it, they had to turn off all the lights. They were going to take all the supplies and leave the gas station immediately. But when they looked around the room, they realized that someone had beaten them to it, and all the shelves were empty. In addition, strange sounds and noises could be heard from the second floor. So they decided to check what it was really. After carefully inspecting the second floor, they saw a zombie in the closet and killed it before the monster could bite anyone. In addition, there was a bag of money. They were so preoccupied with the money that they did not even notice an unknown person sneaking up behind them. The main character realized that something was wrong and saw the unknown person holding a knife in his hands and preparing to attack. But at the last moment, Li Hongxing managed to stop the attacker and save the boy's life. They grabbed him and tried to find out who he was and how he got there. As it turned out, he was the manager of the gas station who was guarding his money. In addition, he had gone mad because he kept talking about ghosts who wanted to rob him. When the police examined the dead woman's body, they saw marks on her neck indicating that she had been strangled. It seemed that the manager had killed her, and she was his employee because she was wearing a work uniform. The man simply raped and killed her, but when she turned into a zombie, he locked her in a closet with his money. He denied his guilt, but it was clear that they were dealing with a real murderer.